Hey everyone, my name is Prism, and welcome back to Prism's Media Spotlight. Today, I'm going to be continuing my rewatch of all the Superman live-action solo outings by watching and reviewing Superman 2 from 1980, or 1981 depending on where you live with its release. I'm also going to be covering the 2006 Richard Donner cut, both of which are primarily the same story, and it's not as much of an overhaul as the Snyder cut, but both of them have quite a few differences that I think both benefit and hurt the narrative. So I'm going to get started by reviewing the theatrical cut of Superman 2. Now, when it comes to the theatrical cut of Superman 2, or all the Richard Donner films in general, I haven't seen them all in a very long time. I think I watched them a couple years back, but this new Superman films kind of made me want to rewatch all of them again. And so it's been really nice now that I'm older and more mature, kind of looking back at these films. Obviously, they didn't come out when I was born. I was born way later than the original Superman films. But it is still cool getting to kind of watch them now that I've matured a bit and I can fully understand them and their place in the pop culture and filmmaking landscape. I mean, Superman the movie and Superman 2 were the first of their kind. This was the first real superhero movie, apart from the 1960s Batman movie, but even then, it's the first real superhero movie where it actually takes the material seriously and you can really tell there is a level of care and love for the source material. Now, Superman the movie and Superman 2 were originally going to be shot back to back, or rather, at the same time, but the Salkinds, getting fearful of the increasing budget, told Richard Donner to halt all production of Superman 2 and finish the first film. And with that, move the time reversal ending to the end of Superman 1. But by the time Richard Donner came to do Superman 2 and finished the film, even though he had done 75%, he was kicked off the project, and what we got was a combination of Richard Donner and Richard Lester footage, and I kind of find it funny that both of them have Richard in their name. But anyways, Superman 2, I think, overall is a great sequel. It's got some flaws. It isn't perfect. You can definitely tell there's some reshoots, but it isn't a disaster like 2017's Justice League, and it actually works really well. The fact is that Superman 2 was a Richard Donner movie, and so Richard Lester's footprints of comedy really didn't ruin the narrative, only kind of ruining some bits here and there, but overall it makes a lot more sense watching the Richard Lester version. And I think that it's a lot more of an enjoyable experience because you're seeing a full movie, you're not seeing a combination of different takes, director's cut footage, Richard Lester footage. You're not getting the hodgepodge that is the 2006 director's cut. But we will talk about that in a minute. I do think Superman 2, on its own, starts off great. I will say there are some issues. I think primarily one of my issues is the opening sequence with the bomb, because basically there is a terrorist group who are going to flatten Paris if the explosion goes off, and Lois Lane's bright idea to go and get the inside scoop is to literally climb under the elevator with the bomb. And I'm sorry, I get she is a reporter, but that feels really, really stupid. That'd be like if a news reporter walked into an actual flame and was trying to do it to report on a wildfire. Now, yes, people go in dangerous locations, and yes, Lois Lane is a reporter, but maybe you don't go right under the explosive, especially when it's on a system that they can just tell it to go up and it'll go up. So that was a little bit strange, and that kind of felt like they were trying to find something to replace the original opening. Because the original opening of the film, well, we'll talk about it when we get to the Donner cut, but it was more of a consequence of Superman throwing the bomb into space in the first film that the villains got out. And here, Superman throws the nuke into space, and because he throws this nuke into space, the villains get out of the Phantom Zone. Now, I should mention something very absent from the film is Marlon Brando. The word is that he was charging a very hefty price. The Soulkinds didn't want to pay him. And even if Richard Donner had finished the film, it would have very much been without the Marlon Brando footage. So instead, they replace him with, I forget the actress's name, but Superman's mom. And they, put her as the one who helps Clark along his journey. But for the beginning sequence, they literally cut out all shots of Marlon Brando's Jor-El, but it feels like they didn't even reshoot it because they're yelling at the end that they will get Jor-El and they'll get his heir one day. And it's just like, okay, but this guy isn't even here at your trial. I don't even know why we had to have the trial at the beginning of the film. Like, I find it really weird that it's at the beginning of both films because it just feels like... I don't know what they were doing. It just feels really weird. Like, hey, here's a scene that means nothing to the plot. Okay, in the film that it does mean something to the plot, let's have the scene. Like, why not choose one and not the other? It just makes the opening of Superman 1 extremely long, but at the same time, it was meant to be one big epic, and they wanted to tie it together and remind you of the threat that had been at the beginning of the first film. Now, in terms of all the performances, I think they're great. Christopher Reeve, Margot Kidder, Gene Hackman, Superman's mother. I don't really know the actress. She did fine. I haven't seen her in many other projects. I haven't seen Marlon Brando in really any other projects. I think all the cast do a great job here. I think the visual effects and the action are great. I do think the third act, Final Battle, has some issues. Not only with the Soul of Fame S or the Superman clones, but with how we go from the city to the final battle. Because I get Superman's point. He wanted to lead the villains away from the city, but he does this by making all the people think that he's left them. He doesn't even tell the villains, hey, come over to my place. He trusts that Lex Luthor will manage to convince them to not kill him because he has the directions to Superman's Fortress of Solitude. That feels really, really dumb. Like, that feels just tacked on. I don't know what they were thinking with it. I would hope that they originally planned to shoot more. Because, if you're watching it the first time, you're like, okay, where is Superman? Like, where did he actually go? But, yeah, I don't really know what they were doing with that. I do think there's some other things, too. I do love the bit where the jerk at the bar basically gets a taste of his own medicine. Like, he tries to assault Clark Kent and get in a fight with him and beats him completely. And then Clark Kent, when he's Superman, doesn't even really punch the villain or anything. He just lets the villain attack him and then pushes him into the machine at the restaurant, which I find very funny. I also like, and I'll talk about this more with the Donner cut, that there is no reverse ending. Meaning that all the people who died, all the damage that was done, all of it, that was because Superman had abandoned the people for his own satisfaction, actually means something. He actually made a mistake that is going to cost lives, where in the Donner cut, he just reverses all of it, and that feels really, really cheap. But we'll talk about that in the Donner cut. Overall, I think the theatrical cut of Superman 2 offers a fine film. I think it needs a lot of fixes. I don't think it's perfect. I do think it has some better ideas for scenes, and I do like some of the comedy bits that were cut. But at the same time, it isn't perfect. It's a great film. It isn't perfect, but I think for being Superman 2, it's a really good sequel. And I think that if no one knew about the production issues, if no one knew about the Richard Donner cut, people would still love Superman 2. And, I really do like sequences in it. I like the use of Superman's mother. I think it's kind of sad that she basically got sidelined and it was all about Jor-El, which I know is the comic book character, and obviously he is Superman's father. But I do like the idea of switching him with Superman's mother instead of, creating a whole new character. I think if I had any other complaints, it would be the repowering sequence, which Richard Lester reshot, and I do like the lighting more. It's a lot more gloomy and a lot darker, but it's really unclear because, well, we'll talk about it in a second. But that's basically my thoughts for Superman 2, the theatrical cut. I do think it is a way better film. I do think it has a lot of great elements in it, and obviously, if I had to give it a ranking, letterbox wise, I would give it like a 4.5 out of 5. I think it's a really enjoyable film. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it really understands who Superman is, and I think there's enough control from Richard Donner, even if on accident, that the film does not become a joke. And I just like that they really care about the characters and that they do a good job finishing the film. Yes, there are bits in it that don't work. Some of the ADR and stuff for Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, or not even ADR, but the recasting for him because he didn't want to come back in loyalty to Donner. I do think it is really great what they've done here, and I do think it's a really good film. And I also just love the poster for it. I really like this shot. But that is basically it for the theatrical cut of Superman 2. Let's get into the 2006 Richard Donner cut. Alright, so the Donner cut of Superman 2 would be released in 2006. Now, the origins of this cut have to do with fan editing, have to do with Superman Returns and wanting to get access to Marlon Brando footage. There's a lot that kind of goes into the origins of this cut, but I think it's really amazing that Warner Brothers actually did put the money in and brought this cut to the public eye. That they went back and they tried to reconstruct the film in more aligned to Richard Donner's full vision. Now, Richard Donner actually was involved, despite initially not wanting to be a part of it, but it should be noted that this is the best Richard Donner cut that could have been made with the circumstances, because most of the actors had passed away, and John Williams was busy with Revenge of the Sith. There were a lot of circumstances that were kind of hindering this from even being a possibility, but they still tried, and they still created something that was really exciting. Now, will I say the Richard Donner cut is better? I will talk about that at the end of this. But I do think it is a great thing to see the vision. We already opened the film with a completely different opening. We have the imprisonment of the three criminals, like the first film, or rather the second film, but we have the Marlon Brando footage included. We also have a brand new opening flashback sequence where we kind of get to see the events of the first film. My only issue is how they transition from this footage to the Superman 2 footage. I think it's kind of jarring and they could have done a better job. But the other thing that we have is a completely different opening at the Daily Planet, where Lois Lane is not obsessed with orange juice, and we actually hear what the reporter's mission is. Instead of Lois Lane going after a bomb, it's Clark Kent and Lois Lane going to Niagara Falls to find out about the corrupt hotel dealings. And Lois Lane is starting to kind of get that Superman and Clark Kent are the same person, and I really like her detective work, trying to just, draw the glasses and draw the suit and trying to convince him, and he's playing all cool like he doesn't know what she's talking about. And then she jumps out the window, and he manages to save her from killing herself. But yeah, so Clark Kent's being innovative. He's not letting Lois Lane know his secret. It's only when they get to Niagara Falls that things get really interesting. Because at Niagara Falls, they completely cut the whole hotel room sequence. And they cut the waterfall sequence of Lois Lane jumping off the railing. And instead of, Clark Kent accidentally putting his hand in the fire, Lois Lane gets a gun and attempts to shoot him. And he pulls off the glasses, he fixes his posture, and you can tell that he's become Superman. But there's one thing I don't get about this scene. It was a blank. Why on earth did Clark Kent do this? I don't get it. We've already seen him deflect bullets before, and I get that it was in front of Lois Lane right here. Like, obviously, he's going to have a reaction, but I don't fully get it. And then she tells him, like I said, it's a blank. So he just revealed his identity when the gun was empty. I think it would have been stupider of Lois Lane, but it would have been more logical in terms of the plot if it was a real bullet. I don't fully get what they were doing with this. This was obviously the screen test that Margot Kidder and Clark Kent had. And you can really tell that this was a screen test. But I do think it's kind of cool that they put it in here. And they also make a lot of changes after this scene. One of the changes that I don't like is that at the Fortress of Solitude, Clark Kent and Lois Lane spend the night before he talks to his parents. And then, they decide to have a relationship and a life together. And all the Marlon Brando footage is put back in, which is really nice. Except sometimes he's a floating head or he's a whole body. Sometimes he'll change between sequences. Maybe this is a secret power of the Kal-El family. I don't know, but I do kind of find it odd. Anyways, I don't really like the idea of Clark Kent and Lois having the night together, and then we get to hear him ask his parents' permission. I liked it more in the Lester cut where it was rearranged, so I don't really know why they did that for the Donner cut. I think that makes Superman look a little bit more irresponsible. However, there are other things in here. So, we still have the fight with the bully. We still have the villains, which are doing things. And there's quite a few changes throughout. There's quite a lot of changes. But I'm kind of going over the big narrative changes. I think one of them that I really like is when Superman goes back and, he shouts for his father. And we kind of get to see Marlon Brando, Jor-El come up to him and be really gentle and just place his hand on him, restoring his power. And it's just a really nice sequence. I think this is amazing that we get to see it, and I actually like the scene a lot better than the theatrical. Even if there are some visual effects weirdness, and even if it could be color corrected, I do think it is a better scene than just, oh, there's a random green crystal on the ground, and Clark Kent finds it, and now he's Superman. I also really like that we have the scene of him just flying out of the Fortress of Solitude to kind of symbolize that he's back and he's better than ever. I do think music-wise this has quite a few issues. Audio-wise too. I was watching this off the Blu-ray box set, which I have in my room up there, and the audio was really poorly mixed during the final battle sequence. But I'm not going to hold that fully against the film because Warner Brothers have been known to do poor transfers. So it might have just been a bad transfer that they did for the audio. But overall, I do think this has quite a few great little additions and changes. I don't think I like the final battle as much because they cut all of the action when they get to the Fortress of Solitude. We basically go from the villains playing and, threatening to kill Lois or threatening to kill Lex Luthor to Superman going into the chamber and then, whoops, all their powers are gone. Obviously not whoops, like he did it on purpose. And I do think that could have been explained a little bit more in both cuts, how he did it. But we don't get, any fighting at the Fortress of Solitude. It's just kind of a standoff. And I kind of like the theatrical version better, even if I didn't like the powers that were used. I think the other thing that I kind of have a big issue with is the ending, because Superman rolls back time, and not only do I think the rewinding time sequence could use a lot of work, it just felt very jarring that suddenly we're rewinding time. It didn't feel as prepared or as built up to as the first film, but it also undermines everything. What was the point of Clark Kent making a mistake of losing his powers and lives being, taken because of it, if he can just rewind the clock and change it back? Yes, this was the original idea for Superman to be one giant epic, and that he would rewind time at the end of the second film, which I don't even get it there. If it was going to be one epic and he did that, that still undermines things. But I also don't get that Jor-El tells him, hey, don't do this in the first film, and he does it anyways, again. I just really don't get it. I really don't get the decision for him to rewind time again after he's been told, don't do this. And it completely undermines everything because it basically makes the film about, oh, he made a bad decision, people got killed, you know, he hurt Lois Lane's feelings by, you know, her realizing that he's Superman but can't be Superman all the time. And instead of, you know, trying to give her an amnesia kiss, which is kind of weird, but I feel like it's better than this ending where he's just like, okay, let me undo everything. And I still do love the sequence where he goes back and gets the bully, but it doesn't make as much sense because now he's just punching a random person. I feel like you could have restructured it to that scene happens first. Also because there's the mention of the restaurant having a lot of damage to it. I don't know why they have that mention in there when clearly Clark Kent has just reversed all the damage. But yeah, I don't get this cut in some of its directions. I think there's a happy medium in here. I think that someone could create an amazing cut of Superman 2. I don't think it's terrible, but honestly, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. I think they really tried their best. Obviously, you can tell spots where they could have tried a little bit harder. The visual effects haven't aged the best. But I still do think it is a great movie because it's Superman 2. I just think that the theatrical cut ultimately is better. And I think it's really unfortunate that Richard Lester was allowed to go fully hands-on and do Superman 3 because, as we will see, that film has its own set of issues. But let me know what you guys think. I hope you all really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed watching both of these films back-to-back. I actually watched the theatrical on Friday and the director's on Saturday, so it was really nice watching them about a day apart and just kind of getting to see the differences. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and bye for now!